Good evening, everyone. This business will convene. Ms. Lassard, can we have the Pledge of Allegiance? Thank you.
Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, everyone, for joining us tonight. Next on the agenda is the action items. Dr. Garcia.
Yeah, I don't have the agenda.
Oh, that's right. We don't have public comment at the beginning? No.
We going to start public comments?
It's here.
There is no public comments on this agenda.
Yeah.
Oh.
Yes, it is. Yeah.
Public
Oh,
dialogue.
at the end, okay.
At the end. It's at the end.
What do you want to do before?
We can do it now.
We can do it now if you prefer.
Yeah, and then we can do it later if they want to.
Okay.
Either way. That's perfectly
So
fine.
you want to go ahead and do the public comments?
Do we have to make a motion to add it?
Yes.
To
Yes,
move
I
it,
did.
yes, we do.
I move we
Make a
add
motion, so that
I move we add a public comment at the beginning of the meeting before the action items.
Second.
All those in favor?
We
That's unanimous. Thank you. We have Mr. Gerald
Sazama.
Sazama? Yes.
Thank you for having this public comment time. My name is Gerald Sozama. I'm a member of Stars Friends Meeting of the Religious Society of Friends, which were commonly known as Quakers. And Quakers are, as you probably know, one of the peace churches in our country, along with the Brethren and the Mennonites and the Amish. However, there are peace traditions in most of the religions within our country. In Catholicism, there is Pax Christi and the Catholic Worker Movement. And in Buddhism, there's peace traditions. In Hinduism, there's peace traditions. So we're not a unique phenomena. It's quite broad. The comments I'm going to make on it are, first, I think that having an Air Force ROTC program at a high school level would contradict your bullying policies. And I'll explain that. The second is, much of this arguments for this frequently are jobs. And why can't we create other kinds of jobs? The third thing is the question of patriotism. Are we not patriotic if we don't support the military? And are there other ways of doing it? And the fourth is this naive? A world that could be in heaven, but it's not possible for Earth. I realize there's limited time. Let me first speak to the bullying question. The ultimate purpose of military is to kill or threaten to kill in order to have someone follow your will. Now, we may think our will is the correct will, and we may even think our will is God's will. But military force is force. And if you see what a bully does, a bully uses psychological or emotional force or even physical force to have his or her way. And the school has, I'm sure, paying much attention to your bullying policy. And children are not naive. They are able to see those kind of contradictions. The second is jobs. I've served my country and as a member of on a contract for the United States Agency for International Development. There are ways to serve our country. There are ways to have creative jobs. If the funding would go in those directions. But too quickly we can hate and fear and not take the time to love and create. The next, I just talked about the patriotism question, and in terms of the Quakers, we've been around for 360 years. We came about 20 years after the Pilgrims came. I happen to be a first-generation American myself, a convert to Quakers, but this is well within the American tradition, and part of our tenets of freedom of religion flow out of just arguing and discussing these kinds of principles. The last and final is that this is not a naive policy. I think on the contrary, it's probably the more realistic one. How do we remote bomb places and not create fear and hate of us? And how do we not create injured people and PTSD people of our soldiers coming back? This is military force creates these kind of problems. Now, Quakers will favor police force. Not everybody does the right thing at the right time. But this is force, it's not violence, and it's not killing. So it is possible to create an alternative future if we would pay attention to it. And please do not step down the easy road of approving this project. As we say, war is not the answer. Love and compassion are the answers. Thank you for this opportunity.
Thank you. Mr. Bill Powers?
Present. Good evening. I would like to share an example of experience from a previous life that I had. Some of you have known me a long time and know that I was a respiratory therapist, and I taught respiratory therapists in college and medical centers. And as part of that, I ended up on the board of directors for the American Lung Association of Connecticut and on their executive board, and had a good deal of experience with them. And the reason I tell you this is that as part of that experience, I fought a battle, and it had to do with prevention. In the battle, I'm sure most of us, except for our little one here with a beautiful flower and her beautiful hair, most of us lived through the period of time when advertising for smoking was directed for the little guys, for teens and even children. So it was smoking was made to be appealing. It had to go through years and years of court kinds of things. What they were really doing, and the reason I bring this up tonight, is they were recruiting young people to be smokers. And they not only was that in the United States, but they're still doing it in other parts of the world, less developed parts of the world. And there are reasons for that. It is that young people, even 13, 14, 15-year-old, and as we all know from recent studies in psychology, that most, on the average, the human brain isn't matured until 23 to 25 years of age. It has to do with the ability to make decisions, the executive function part of the brain, in some cases anyway. Some of us are still trying to learn that. So I guess my point, to follow up on this gentleman, I'm not going to, some of the points I was about to make, some of the points he made, and I would agree with them in a sense about what the nature of a military establishment is all about ultimately. And the values that are taught there, some people might say are important, but those values can be taught in a wonderful high school like this, in other activities, for instance, sports or theater, working as a team member, being responsible to your other members of your team, and it goes on and on and on. So I see this as a possible means of recruitment. I know that that's what junior ROTC is all about, is to fill the ranks at higher levels. I did research it, and I found out that most junior ROTC members don't go on to ROTC in college. They end up at lower ranking positions levels, which may or may not be good. I can't judge that. But I can say that ultimately, folks that are at the college level who join ROTC are much more capable, I believe, of making those kinds of decisions. And so let's not indoctrinate our youth or put them or expose them to unnecessary indoctrination prior to their brain being matured. Did I hear that thing going off?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you for letting me run over a little bit. Good night, everybody.
Thank you. Next is Mr. Bill Stover.
Good evening.
Good evening.
Thanks for letting me join you here. I'm Bill Stover. I'm from Columbia, actually, but I work in the system. Back in, 1964, I joined the Army. I was 17 years old. I had no other choice. My family was too poor to do anything else. So I joined the Army, and fortunately, well, first of all, I went to basic training, and after about 2 weeks in basic training, I hated everything about the military. I didn't want to go in the military. I wanted to get out of the military, but I was already there, and I couldn't get out. So I stayed with it. They sent me to language school. I learned Vietnamese. Then I was in Vietnam for like 25 months, 17 days. But I wasn't counting.
7 hours and 13 seconds, yeah.
But the reason I'm telling you this is I wished I'd had an opportunity because I was forced. I really had to go in the military. I had no other choice, either than take a job and then not be able to do anything with my life. But by going into the military, later on, I figured out, I then got the GI Bill after I got out. When I survived, I lived through it. Had I been an officer, my chances of living through it would have improved 100%. So I think the good thing about the ROTC is that it gives our young people an opportunity to get into the military as an officer, not as an enlisted person. And to do that, they have to have good grades. They have to, there are some requirements. I do not recommend the military to anyone. My 11th grader came home when he was in 11th grade last year, and he told us he wanted to get in the military. My wife freaked out, but I had her go in the other room, and then I talked to him about the military. You don't want to go in the military? Listen, man, you want to go in as an officer. And I told him about ROTC, and I went through the whole thing, and I even gave him a phone number. And fortunately, he never called, and we were happy. I'm a member of the Baha'i Faith. We are not conscientious objectors. We serve, but not in a combatant status. But since I'd already joined the Army, I was in Vietnam in a combatant status, but as a conscientious cooperative, which meant that I went around with everybody else, and I just tried not to shoot anybody. So to me, it's a good opportunity. I don't recommend it to anybody to go in the military, but if you're going to go in the military, you should go in as an officer. And this is the kind of program that would help young kids who were in my situation especially to get that next step without having to go as a grunt, as we call ourselves, right? Thank you for listening.
Thank you for your
Thank you.
service.
Mr. Foster?
Good evening, everybody. Jason Foster, I'm the principal at Windham High School. I'd just like to share, in looking at the literature for the Air Force Junior ROTC, that it talks about the students having access to reaching their personal best in physical fitness and academics. And then as I was exploring why we should support this, and I look at our mission statement, and it's providing equitable access and opportunities for students. So in listening to the comments, I'd just like to comment that this is just, another piece to a wide range of experiences that we provide for our students and learning opportunities to just widen the scope for students on the choices that they have. I do want to echo the sentiments of Mr. Stover, is that as someone who explored 4 or 5 years into teaching, possibly leaving it, I had 2 grandfathers who had served the country in various arms of the forces, and it was something that I contemplated, as well as the state police. I think that it doesn't have to be a violent act. I just believe that if you have a sense of service, if you have a sense of commitment, if you believe in developing yourself in a particular way, this might be the framework or structure for you. But I still think it would be characterized as a choice that students can make, just as if they choose a pathway in the schools and a pathway in academies that we've had previously in this building. So I would hope that we would exercise the students' right to make a choice for themselves on what is right and what is fair. And this is certainly a part of our country and the way that we develop our democracy. So it's just, I believe, another opportunity for our students to explore. So I'm glad that the board is considering it, and I do believe that it provides financial support for students that may not have it, and other experiences, and it also allows people to see parts of the world that they may not be able to see without that. And I believe that it would just widen the scope of experiences that we offer to our students. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Next on the agenda is the field trip for Windham High School to Washington, D.C.
Make a motion to approve the field trip to Washington, D.C.
Second?
Is Gettysburg and Washington DC one trip?
Yes.
Yes, it's one trip,
Yes.
yes.
It was all in the
It's all in the
the
packet.
description. It's all in the packet.
And the motion should be to approve the field trip to Washington DC and Gettysburg.
And get it.
Correct.
I just said the field trip. I didn't
Yeah, okay.
extrapolate.
Yeah.
Finish.
I didn't need to. The field trip, there's only one on our agenda.
All those in favor? That's unanimous. Dr. Garcia? I just have one question. Have they begun to fundraise for this field trip?
Yes.
They
did a
have.
They did a Butter Braid field fundraiser already.
Okay,
That already went through. It was due last Friday.
okay, good, because I remember the conversation before where they had run into problems. Wasn't this particular field trip, it was other field trips.
No, it was this field trip.
It was?
Yeah.
And,
They do it every other year.
and then they asked for money.
Was the, this one and the music, but we already put in place some protocols
Okay.
to make sure that before they leave for the field trip, we will certify that they have the money for the field trip.
Perfect, okay, wonderful.
Not only this one, all field trips.
All field
So
trips,
the
right.
protocol is system-wide.
And I'm glad it's working because that was an issue last time. Thank you. So that's unanimous. It's approved. Next on the agenda, it's the recommendation approval for the district to enter an agreement with the United States Air Force to house the JROTC program at Windham High School. And the description of the JROTC was in your packets. And I know some of you may have questions.
You have to have a motion first.
I'll make the motion to approve the JROTC program at that.
Second.
Thank you.
Okay?
Yeah, go ahead.
What I have to say, I've written down, make sure I don't mess it up.
No, you're good.
I'm a Vietnam-era veteran, and while I'm pleased with the current support for veterans, the nation's attitude was very different in the late 60s and early 70s. Not everybody's old enough to remember what it was like. More than 40 years passed before any official thanked me publicly for my service, and my experience was not unusual. So that history probably has something to do with my perspective on this issue. I've had nearly 50 years to reflect on my own military service and that of a number of others. I have some concerns about a one-sided presentation by retired Air Force officers and NCOs in favor of military service as a regular component of our high school curriculum. The Air Force promises to teach life skills, provide leadership opportunities, and build character. These are all legitimate and laudable, but they're not complete. The promotional material given to us regarding this program does not mention a major aspect of military life, sacrifice. Everyone who serves sacrifices. For many, the sacrifice is relatively small, but for some, it's their entire future. All military organizations exist for one purpose. War is the mission. Our armed forces constantly either engage in or prepare for combat. The military does not lose track of the mission. Everything that the military does is oriented toward the single mission of effectiveness as a fighting force. And since at least Alexander the Great, militaries have glorified and romanticized warfare as a distraction from the reality that combat is an ugly, nasty, and dangerous business that can literally get you killed. I was not assigned a combat role, but several of my father's cousins were during the Second World War. And I learned from them the reason that many veterans rarely, if ever, discuss what happened in combat. It's that those experiences were terrifying and traumatizing. I've never talked to anyone who views their personal battlefield experiences as heroic or romantic, regardless of whatever medals or awards were handed out afterwards. Many vets suffer from wondering why they survived when friends around them did not. In short, I do not believe that the Air Force will present our students with a full story of what military life can be like. There are lots of things that we as a society have decided young people are not yet mature enough to decide about for themselves. 15, 16, and 17-year-olds are too young to vote, too young to sign a contract, too young to buy a pack of cigarettes, too young for an unrestricted driver's license, and too young to enlist in the military without their parents' permission. I believe they're also too young to be exposed to pro-military promotional campaigns. The Air Force states that junior ROTC is not a recruitment program, but what that actually means is that they're not going to recruit students while they're still in high school. Naturally, they'll use the information about who participated in the program as a prospect list once they've graduated. So, in addition, I have some practical concerns. ROTC stands for Reserve Officer Training Corps. With very few exceptions, the United States Armed Forces require that commissioned officers have a college degree. Therefore, I think it's reasonable to ask if the Air Force can demonstrate, that participation in junior ROTC can actually increase the likelihood that students will go on to attend and graduate from college. The Memorandum of Understanding that we are asked to approve requires a minimum of 120 classroom hours of instruction in each of 3 years. Our school year is 180 days. Hence, the Air Force is asking for an average of 40 minutes in each school day. And that's essentially the equivalent of one course each year, right? Unless junior ROTC is strictly extracurricular, I believe that our students will be better off taking regular math and science courses. The memorandum also indicates that the Air Force will provide certification licensure training to those instructors who teach and administer the program courses, but it does not specify that this training meets state of Connecticut certification requirements for high school teachers. The memorandum specifically requires that Windham High School teach the required Air Force ROTC courses prescribed by the Air Force, deviating from the prescribed curriculum only when specifically approved by the Air Force. That provision appears to ask the Board of Education to abdicate its responsibility for a component of the high school curriculum. And that request seems contrary to the concept of local control of education. In conclusion, I'm the son, grandson, and great-grandson of veterans. I'm proud to have served my country. However, I cannot in good conscience support a curriculum not subject to Board of Education revision that delivers what amounts to a sustained sales pitch to young people whom society does not think of as old enough to make potentially life-changing decisions for themselves. Thank you. That's what I have to say.
Thank you. Any, Dr. Gomez?
Yes. I want to say that I'm supportive of this action. However, I have some reservation after reading the MOU. First of all, we're committing here to 3 years. I don't know how much does it entail. Some of us may not be here, may be gone, and we're leaving that to someone else coming. So I want to also know what are the costs involved in this project, because there is always cost involved. And the third one, I think we may be rushing into this decision because it was just brought up last week, and now we have to vote to accept the memorandum, the agreement. And after reading that MOU, as I said previously, I don't think I'm ready. I think we need to discuss this further, and I don't know, discuss it maybe with teachers, communities, and in order to make an informed decision for this. So those are my points of view.
Thank you, Dr. Gomez. Mr. Kaleja?
Excuse me. Like Dr. Sewell, I'm a Vietnam era veteran. I was Navy. And while many of the components of military training on the surface are laudable: community, teamwork, discipline. After hearing the presentation this evening and reading the MOU, I find myself very torn about supporting the program at the high school level. I would personally like to see a presentation. I'm uncomfortable personally with high school level military programs like this, especially in the face of the relatively rigid requirements of the MOU. So I would personally like to table this, spend a little more time reflecting on it, and get a specific presentation from the Air Force before I would support the idea.
Thank you, Mr. Kaleja. Mr. Montalvo?
Yes, I agree with Dr. Gomez that it's too early to make such a decision, especially if we don't have any kind of survey for parents of children, find out if they like the program or not, okay? And to make a commitment for the next 3 years, just without taking in consideration all the pros and cons, I don't like the program because of that.
Thank you, Mr. Montalvo. Mrs. Lazard?
In the past week, I've spent some time looking up the pros and cons, and honestly, I've had difficulty finding information from credible sources, but I have been able to get in touch with some people who have had experience with junior ROTC programs, and maybe because my experiences are different from that of a veteran, but that of a teacher, that the students seem to be quite enthusiastic about the program and did not feel pressured to be joining the military, and saw it as an opportunity, as a sense of belonging, to work on community activities and leadership. So I'm in favor of it, but again, my experience is different.
Thank you. Mrs. Lambert?
Thank you. I am the daughter of Army veteran who served in Korea. And I just had some questions. I did some research. I'm kind of really torn on which side of this fence, Dr. Garcia, I've spoken to you about this when you called last week, which side of this fence I wanted to come down on. I do feel like we haven't gotten enough information. Last week said proposal about ROTC, and other than what was included in the packet and a couple of people who came and spoke about it, I didn't feel there was a thorough proposal, an opportunity to ask questions of somebody who was involved in the program. And that was just my take from it, as others have shared tonight. I had questions about how this is going to fit in here at the high school. We're already divided between 2 academies, the ECHO program, now ROTC, it seems like we're dividing this school up into a million pieces of pie, then it's going to lose some of its cohesiveness, which is what students had come to us about. I think when you first got here, Dr. Garcia, and we had the 2 academies, students came to us and said, I'm sure the rest of you that have been on the board remember this, that when we went to 2 academies, they felt like the school was divided and it wasn't one Windham High School anymore. I'm afraid that this is another way to divvy it up. How does this fit in with the curriculum? We currently have 21 credits. Do they get credit for this? Is it going to diminish their time in their other classes? How do they get Tier 2 and Tier 3 intervention if they're also doing this? It narrows down their amount of time to be able to spend in academic classes, which we have put a huge emphasis on, no distracting activities, less field trips, all of those other things to diminish the amount of time that our students are spending in classes. I'm concerned about fund limitations and how this is going to affect our class size. We have, honors English classes and college prep English classes here in the building that have 26 and 27 students in it. Some of them 10 special ed and only 1 tutor. Are these students going to get smaller classes if there's a smaller cohort with just this program, like the ECHO students have had in the past? I know the ECHO students have been added back into regular classes recently, but that there's also a consideration on the board right now to pull them back out again into their own classes. I'm concerned about how we're going to afford this. If we can't afford to add an extra English teacher to the high school, if that's what's needed to diminish these class sizes, how are we going to afford an ROTC specific person? And then my final concern was that they'll be jointly evaluated between the superintendent and the ROTC. And here there was an indoor drill facilities. Right now we have practices for gymnastics and indoor track competing for gym time. How are we going to provide them with indoor facilities? But in here it said cooperative employee of the district and the AFJ ROTC. I have a concern because we have an employee in that position right now, and that cooperative review isn't working so well between the district and another entity. How is that going to work? Are we going to have that more clearly laid out so we don't run into the same problems we're having now? I have a lot of questions and a lot of still unknowns before I think I can support this proposal.
Thank you, Mrs. Lambert.
May I say something?
Yes, Dr. Garcia?
So I am so disappointed that I didn't receive all the questions before. Board members know that they can send all the questions that they have to me, and I will answer them. So I'm very disappointed. And the other thing that I would like to say is that the application for this RTC was done 3 years ago when all of you were on the board except for Mrs. Lazar. So the application was done when Dr. Namaski was here and Annie Ortiz. The only person who was not on the board was Mrs. Lazar when this was done. So I do want to point that. Well, okay, so
Dr. Gomez.
Dr. Gomez and Ms. Lazar. So during the time that you were on the board, this application was done. All I did was to come back and refrigerate it, but it was done. So I hear your experiences about Vietnam. So let me talk to you about my experience as an Army wife of 26 years and the mother of a captain in the United States. So I don't know about Vietnam, what I heard from my husband's parents. But let me talk to you about current experiences of an Army wife of 26 years and a captain, the wife of the mother of a captain in the United States Army. We are about access and opportunity. This is not a mandated program for kids. It's about access and opportunity for kids. They are, just in the Air Force, over 892 schools with Air Force RTC in this country. They are over, those Air Force, not including Marine and Navy, over 150,000 students that are in the Air Force Junior RTC. I start doing some more research today, and about 50 to 65% of the kids do go to college. So not because you're in the Air Force RTC, you'll end up going into the military. The RTC program is 40% aerospace science, astronomy, flight, 40% leadership, and 20% physical education. I will do what the board wants me to do, but again, this was done because it's a program for access and opportunity. There have not been one school that I have spoken in this country that have not spoken very highly about this program. Some research state that it increases attendance, increases graduation rate, and increases college attendance rate for students. UConn, around the corner, has an RTC Army and an RTC Air Force, and I had the opportunity to speak to them. When we look at costs, from minimum cost, about $27,000 a year, we will get 2 instructors that not only are instructors, qualified officers at the Air Force, but will serve as instructors, mentors, and coaches for our students. They are so prepared to do this job that in the state of Connecticut, when they come to an Air Force RTC program, the state of Connecticut accept their certification from any of the forces, Army, Navy, or Marine. So those are some questions that need to answer. So the cost, Mrs. Lambert, for $27,500, we will get somebody that will be a good role model for our students, that will be a mentor to our students, and be a coach, can be a coach to our students. So, I mean, I took some of the questions down, I be able to answer them, I guess, in the future, but not the majority. The majority of kids on the Air Force RTC not necessarily going to the ranks.
I didn't say that, yeah, but thank you.
Just one.
Thank you.
I have a question. Do you know, how many schools in Connecticut
Yes.
are part of it?
Yes, in Connecticut, there are 10 high schools that are those Air Force. There are others that are Army and Navy. Danbury High School has an Air Force. Newark High School has an Air Force. Windsor High School has an Air Force. Windsor,
How many high schools in Connecticut?
about 10.
All together? How
Those
many high
Air
schools do we have in Connecticut?
I don't know.
158?
Yeah.
I don't know.
No, not that many. We have
169
169
169 towns,
towns.
right, but there's some regionals.
Yeah, like a
A lot of regional, yeah.
think
Keep
we have
in mind
about
that some
30.
others have Army and some others have Navy, like in the New London, Groton area, there's lots of Navy RTC. And Bloomfield has Army, and some other places have Army, but some school district like Groton and New London are all basically Navy RTC.
And Dr. Gomez, last week I brought information, and there's currently schools on the waiting list because they want this program, but they only accept certain numbers per year. So there's 29 schools on the waiting list right now.
So we've been waiting, we've been on a waiting list for 3 years.
Yes.
One more thing, Mrs. Lambert, I think that's a question I can answer. How do they fit in the curriculum? The aerospace science classes are elective, so they fit as a science elective. The 20% wellness program fits in PE, and so school district decide how they want to put that and how they want to deal with that. The courses are astronomy, the history of flight, aerospace science, aerospace aviation. So the school district decide how they fit that into science or elective or into wellness.
Question. Do all the students have the equal opportunity to join?
Everybody has the
even,
opportunity.
Even if they're some kind of physically impaired or special ed?
This is a choice.
This is a choice that the people make.
Yeah, but will they be accepted? Knowing that the Army or the Air Force later on won't accept them if they have any kind of a problem.
But I don't think all kids go in here because they want to go into. I think kids go in here because of the sense of belonging, as Mrs. Lazar said. I guess the sense of learning more about their own country and leadership. It's not necessarily that everybody goes in an RTC program is going to end up going
Because I
into
think
force.
about a career. This is making a career out of this, okay?
Not necessarily. I have two
Well,
kids.
most of them-
I have two kids that went to RTC, and one ended up being in the service, and the other one ended up being an engineer. So both of them went. One ended up being an engineer, and the other one ended up being, don't want to know nothing with the military. The other one ended up in the military.
Well, like what Mr. Stover said before, when you're poor, this is what you look to make a career. When you have parents that you are not so poor, so do you look in different areas that is not this?
Hold, Dr. Soul, and then Ms.
You
Lazar.
have training, so you have to train.
A little history here. The junior ROTC program was authorized by Congress in 1916, but it was practically invisible until 1973. What happened in 1973 was the draft ended, and the country decided to have an all-volunteer force. And so the armed forces used junior ROTC as part of their marketing program. It's grown as a result of the need to generate volunteers to volunteer for military service. So one of my questions is, if it's a reserve officer training corps, then it's going to require a college degree. If it's used as a recruitment tool to get enlisted people, then it shouldn't be called ROTC. So that's one statistic to look at. What's the breakdown between how people who participate in this program actually serve if they do serve? Second, to your question about whether anybody and everybody can sign up. Technically, yes, but drill is part of the program. If you can't march, I don't think you can participate, you can succeed at what the program expects of you. I'm an ROTC graduate, but at the university, it's a different deal. It's a promise that you're going to graduate with a commission in the armed services. And essentially, the other thing that makes a difference, and made a difference for Mr. Stovert, is how old are you when you make the decision? One of my real concerns is that this program is designed to start at age 15. Too young. You can't, there's lots and lots of things that our society chooses to not allow 15, 16, and 17-year-olds to do. Why not?
Okay, so let me correct that.
Thank you.
You don't have to be a ninth grade on RTC
No, it's 10th
necessarily. So 10th graders and 11 and 12 graders. So if the board is not in favor of it, I mean, the purpose why we brought it on board is because 3 years ago, before my time, there was an application made. I seriously believe, it is my experience, so I don't have the Vietnam experience, but it's my experience that in the schools that have this program, it has been beneficial not only to the students in the program, but to the culture of the school. Last week, you heard from teachers from Natchog talking about how beneficial. But it's not my intention to put something to the board that the board will not going to support. So I will say, I will draw the recommendation. My experience is not the Vietnam experience, and I think the country has gone far away from Vietnam in 2016. 2016. So my experience as an educator of over 30 years has been very positive.
Thank you. Mr. Montalvo, the answer to your question is on page 3 of the packet. It talks about recruitment, so you'll find that answer there. It's voluntary. Ms. Lazard.
I was just going to say that I almost feel more comfortable providing students with an opportunity to educate them about the military, because they're going to make the decision before their brain's developed anyway, whether or not they're going into the military. So either you enlist at 18, have no background knowledge of it, haven't had that camaraderie with a group, or you enlist and maybe you have an idea, or like the majority, I found the similar statistic that 60% of the kids aren't even going enlisting into the military.
Exactly.
So I think we all have our own experiences, but I think we also need to think about the kids and that it's an opportunity that we're presenting to them.
Thank you, Ms. Lazard. Ms. Lambert?
I just wanted to respond to something Dr. Garcia said. 3 years ago, when Dr. Adamowski began this process, no one on this board at that time, Dr. Sewell, you were chair, I'm not sure if you were made aware of it, but no one on this board was made aware of this in any kind of meeting, any kind of formal way. It says in the paperwork that there was a walkthrough.
Yes. There's a walkthrough was conducted at the high school.
Was that conducted before you got here?
Conducted before my time when you guys were on the board.
So that,
But the board wasn't.
the board was not a part of this, if I may finish speaking. The board was not a part of this. You're angry at me
No, I'm not
for
angry
my
at you, Mrs.
questions.
I'm not
Let
angry
me
at
finish,
you.
please.
Hold on.
You're angry with me for my questions, and I wanted to
How do you know I'm
clear it up.
angry? I'm just presenting the facts.
Because
One
you
at a time,
directed your
please.
comments to everything to me. But let me finish, please. I am not sure the high school even looks like what it looked like 3 years ago when that walkthrough happened. I'm not sure that there is the space here to be able to facilitate indoor drills. I'm not sure that there is the makeup of our population. It says up to 150 students in this. That's a quarter of our high school current population of 600. Do they have a minimum requirement for a number of students
So
that will be
yeah.
entailed, included in this? The board was not notified of this application being made. I'm sure there were other things that have been, there's a Commissioners Network application that we haven't been notified of yet either. But as there are other things that have come up, there are other things that Dr. Adamowski did that we were never informed of. So to hold us responsible for that is egregious and wrong. To hold us responsible for, and all my comments was, I do not have enough information to make a decision at this time. If we want to go forward with the motion, because of that, I'm going to have to vote no. But I really wanted to support this, but I don't have the information I need. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Lambert. Let me just add, 3 years ago, I came on board when Dr. Adamowski just came on. And you're right, a lot of the things were not shared with the board, and that was totally his responsibility. But as Dr. Garcia indicated, the application came up. All she's doing is bringing this forward and giving the board members a choice. And I hear you loud and clear, you want information. I suggest we table the motion and
For a table is,
we get a presentation so that we can make an appropriate choice. Mrs. Lazard?
If we do that, is there a deadline, a time that you have to get this approved?
Yeah, I
by?
think by the end of January. sometime.
Okay.
And those to answer
Thank you.
Mrs. Question about 150, it can be open to other schools in the area. So, for example, Windham Techs already know that we're interested, and they said they would like to join us. So we can open it to kids in Lebanon, E.O. Smith, and others, so not necessarily only kids from here. For example, UConn has a program, and Eastern does that. So the students go from Eastern to the program in UConn to have their classes.
Thank you.
Was there a minimum number? I'm sorry, that's just a follow-up to my previous question. Is there a minimum number of students that we need to,
It's like 10% of your total enrollment.
so 60 students would be a
Yeah.
minimum?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
But you have 2 years to get to 60 students.
Dr. Gomez?
Okay, I did have students at Eastern that went to Yukon for the ROTC. It's very different from what we're doing here. And I think Paul suggested that we table that, and I think I heard Mrs. Lambert saying that, and I don't think, but you call for a withdrawal of the application.
No, it's they withdraw tonight to approve it.
For tonight, I think I'm supportive, but I feel like I don't have a lot of information on it. And I want to make a decision that is going to bind us for 3 years. And we need to make an informed decision. That's the whole, I want to support it, but I need more than that. You know, I also want to know why 7% of the high school in Connecticut, that's the number, has that program. If it's that good, why doesn't 50% of high school have it? There are questions that I need to have answered before. And as I said, I want to say that I want to support it, but I want to be very knowledgeable and informed about I also want to see that by doing this, we're not taking away from other places. But sometimes it's a zero-sum game. Okay, so what you take from one place or what you put in one place is taken from another, because there aren't any more resources. So we really need to look into all these issues, and then when we go for it, we go all the way.
Thank you. Dr. Sewell?
I actually agree with Mrs. Lassard that there would be a lot of value in young people learning more about the military. But my concern is, if that's going to happen, it shouldn't be a one-sided presentation. And any of the military services, I'm very proud of having been in the Navy, and I went through ROTC in the Navy. One of the best courses that I took at college was a course on sea power and history that a young naval officer taught at 7:30 in the morning. The course content was more exciting than he was. But none of the armed forces are going to want to teach the whole picture. And there is the other side of the military, and there are books that there's some excellent literature that you can read that were actually written by people who've served in combat. There are letters from soldiers before and after battles that can give you some sense of what the experience is like. Or you can go see the opening part of Saving Private Ryan, which is, yes, probably one of the most realistic battle scenes ever filmed. It's not pleasant to watch. So if we're going to teach young people about the military, we need to teach them the whole story, not just part of the story.
Thank you. Mr. Kalajian, I'm sorry.
My previous comments had to do with mostly feelings, my sense of the age-appropriate content of military training. As a matter of correction, I was not on the board when Dr. Adamowski was here. I came on board just after he left, but that's secondary to it's academic to this question. I personally believe that every educational opportunity, and I think that fundraising and the way it happens and the way it's done for our clubs is an educational opportunity. It's training, it's teaching them. It has to be blended. All of their experiences that have to do with this high school have to be looked at within the construct of education. And this is no different. I think that all of the board members are expressing some concerns in one way or another, and I think we need to make a measured choice, a balanced decision. So I would like to put this aside personally and get more information and have a presentation by instructors that are experienced in the program. I guess that's it.
Thank you. I would propose that we defer to January 11th, if that's possible. I know that the deadline is at the end of January. Will you be able to provide a presentation?
I will try my best.
Dr. Garcia?
I'll try my best.
Okay. Is that okay?
Yeah, I have a comment before that. We take that vote. I was reading the bylaw and the whole thing, and it's equal opportunity for everybody to
For
apply.
everyone, yes.
But now the instructor, he has to go through the application, and he or she may choose certain student or other student based on the point average, the academics, behaviors, and so other factors that they will go into it. And that's the way it will be done. So not everybody that apply mean that you're in. They have to take so much in consideration for them to be in that program, according with the bylaw and on page 3.
So that's something we could ask.
That's something that we can ask the officer when they come to do the presentation, if that's something that they look at. Okay? So I defer this to January 11th. Okay? So we will not be taking a vote tonight.
Do you know for sure that the application deadline is January 31st? Or do you know for sure?
It's somewhere in January. I have to look at it. I'm not sure exactly.
Okay. Next on the agenda is the workshop topic.
We're going to defer, we should vote.
I'm sorry.
Because there was a motion on the table.
Yes.
On the floor.
Who made the motion?
Ms. Lazari.
To defer it.
I
Oh,
see.
not to defer.
Yeah,
Not to
no,
defer.
not a motion, that's what I mean.
Right,
That's what I'm
The motion's still
recommending.
up on the floor, so
I'll make
I
a
would make-
motion, go ahead. I'll make a motion to defer this topic until we have a full presentation in January.
I would second that.
Thank you. All those in favor?
Can I ask a question? Out of curiosity, could some of the students be involved in that presentation? My first question, you guys to think about. The second question is, do we have enough students that will meet the academic and behavior standards and be interested in this program? And have we polled the students?
Can we have a survey ready for the beginning of the year when they come back?
But keep in mind, it could be students also, like I said, Windham Tech would partner with us, and Windham Tech has about 10% of their graduating class always join the military.
Right, but if
Different.
we've got more students coming from other schools, why are we putting
Thank you for bringing that up. That's something that we will consider. Thank you.
What was the question? What did he say?
So,
Move on. We're done, so, yeah, we can, table it, move on.
Move on, yes, please. So next on the agenda is the workshop topic.
Madam Chair, you have Dr. Joe Sarasullo and Mr. Barrader. Mr. Sarasullo from CAPS, the Superintendent Association, and Mr. Barrader from CAPE, two outstanding individuals that are very seasoned at providing workshop to board members. Seasoned.
Seasoned, that's a good word for you,
No,
Bob.
seasoned.
Good word for you, Bob, seasoned.
Seasoned in providing.
He's seasoned, I'm old.
So this topic is on board relations.
Well, thank you for joining us tonight.
Our pleasure, and I want to thank you for having us. And, you know, we're going to talk a little about roles and responsibilities of the board, working with the superintendent. That's what we're here for. How much time are we being given? I see there are still things on your agenda.
No, there's,
We
don't have an executive session tonight.
Okay.
We already did the public dialogue, so you're it.
We're it. Because usually when you go into roles and responsibilities, it's a fairly long discussion, and for it to be really effective, you need everybody talking about what they think, why they were on the board, filling out one of the surveys. Unfortunately, we didn't get that in time for tonight's meeting. Also,
Only 3 people responded.
my secretary unfortunately was out sick today, so I couldn't have her aggregated, but we're going to give you the general parts to this. We're both open to questions, and we both have spent huge amounts of time on it. So we're going to give you a copy of the school governance position statement that CABE and CAPS both adopted, done with the help of Lead Connecticut, which talks about the various responsibilities of boards, superintendents, and those they do together. I'd like to ask you one question, having just watched the board in action. Do you have a policy on field trips?
Yes.
Yes.
Then why did you need to have a discussion about it?
We didn't.
Then why did you have to vote in favor of it? Why did you have to have a motion?
It didn't have to be on the agenda.
The point is, from that simple little thing, is that many boards spend a lot of time on things. You didn't spend that much time on it. It wasn't like the second discussion. But many boards have things that they put on their agenda that just slow them down, so they're not spending the time that they really should be spending. If you have a policy, the policy should have been one of the first things you looked at. And very frankly, this should have been an administrative decision made pursuant to the policy. If the board itself has questions about the policy, that's fine. You ask questions of your superintendent. If you're not happy with the policy, you bring the policy up, but you shouldn't be spending your time doing individual things like voting on each field trip. So that's a start.
In the past, I've argued for a consent agenda for items that you're obviously going to vote for. We're required to vote for on grant applications, for example. When have you ever heard of a board voting no on an application for a grant?
Sure.
So if you put it on a consent agenda, then basically what a consent agenda is it passes unless somebody wants to talk about it.
Right.
And the only time really that something like a field trip should come before you is if the administration wants an exception to the policy. I can't think of what an exception would be unless it's to go to Mars or something, but that should be what you end up voting on. And if the administration is following the policy you set, they can just let you know about it, and then you don't have to worry about it.
And that could be done in a superintendent's report. It does not have to be in any kind of board motion or official, I guess what a superintendent sends to the board is official. It could be FOI'd at any time, but it needn't take up time, which I'm sure is in short supply here, as in most boards of education. So let me just start off by giving you a few of the basics that I like to cover in a meeting of the Board of Education.
Tracy, slide the table.
You'll be sorry you did that.
Good plan.
So I just want to go through a few of the things very quickly. And usually I take a lot more time and we go through the self-evaluations, but we don't have them. So let me just tell you There are basically three roles of a Board of Education. One is to adopt the budget and recommend the budget to the city or the town. Second is to hire and fire and evaluate a superintendent. And we do have a partner piece to this one. This is the one I'm going to give you on school governance. But Joe and I work very hard, as well as other people, on putting together a way of evaluating the superintendent. But we always suggest that before you do that, you evaluate the Board of Education, because if the board is giving 5 or 6 different directions, board members are giving 5 or 6 different directions to your superintendent, it's very hard for the superintendent to know exactly what he or she is supposed to do. And I'm only saying he or she, Superintendent Garcia, just to make it a little more general. But certainly if you were to have a workshop on that type of thing, we could go into a little more detail. The third thing is to pass policies, adopt policies and bylaws. Bylaws are the way in which the board itself operates and should cover everything to how to get on an agenda for everybody, how agendas are made, what should be on the agendas of the board, how do you handle your elections. You probably have this if you have a good policy manual, which I haven't seen, but assuming you do, you probably have all this already. It also talks about public participation. You're not required to have public participation, but if you do have it, you've got to give everybody the same amount of time. Be very careful of what you don't allow them to talk about. There are some rules, and these are probably in your bylaws. The policies, on the other hand, are just like what we were talking about a few minutes before. When do you approve field trips? How are they approved? What are the criteria for field trips? But you probably have information in your policy manual, or if you don't, you should have, about how you handle curriculum and instruction. It seemed to both of us as we're sitting there that when you're talking about whether you are going to have Air Force ROTC in the schools, some of the questions such as how will this affect the curriculum, how will this affect the time of the students, should probably have been discussed by a curriculum committee. Do you have one?
No. We do not have a curriculum
No.
committee. Dr. Adamowski removed it from our abilities when he was here. And it was
Okay.
never re-added. We
Okay.
did have a curriculum committee.
Might be something you want to think about. One of the things about doing a roles and responsibilities workshop is talking about possible goals you might have. And a goal for the year might be, should we have a curriculum and instruction committee? Many boards do. They usually have some kind of a policy committee. When was the last time your policies were updated?
We work on them.
We work in that.
Do you work on them? Where do you get your information? Kate?
Okay.
Okay.
And,
Then you're getting good
attorneys.
stuff.
Yeah. And Attorney Munoz.
But usually there's a policy committee to keep things moving, so, and you usually have like a facilities or personnel,
Yes.
maybe both, and a finance committee, those type of things. The idea of those is so that you make decisions before they come to the, you don't make final decisions, but you have recommendations from the curriculum committee. Yes, we should have ROTC, or no, we shouldn't, and these are the reasons. It's been discussed. The ideas have been thought about. And everybody can go to one of these meetings, but usually the idea is they're a way to make the board more efficient and effective, because you should be spending your time on things like, why is that third grade not doing so well? Why is the sixth grade, how do we improve the education and the achievement of the students at that time? You should have discussions, you should bring in students, you should bring in teachers, and discuss how do we make the district better. You have gone through a lot of change over the last 3 to 5 years, and you still have the opportunity to do that. So those are the things I tell boards as their general roles, those 3 areas. And when we get into a little more detail, as far as board members yourselves, your job is to be at meetings, read the material in advance. If you have questions, like some of you did, you should ask your superintendent in advance so she has time to do a little research, just the type of research, when is the application due, that we discussed tonight. But if you expect her to know and remember everything, especially about something that came up 3 years ago, then you're expecting a lot. And you can ask each other, be careful about FOI, things can be open to the public, but if Mrs. Lambert, who I've known for years, a good board member, comes to lots of things, has something she wants to bring to the table, she should know exactly how to get it on the agenda, and then you have your discussion about it. And you should look at those bylaws too every couple of years. I'm working with a district, it's been all over the newspapers, Bridgeport, where one person can put something on the agenda. And they have a person who is a dissident, who doesn't agree with the superintendent, doesn't agree with the board chair, and she puts things on the agenda and slows everything down. But there should be a way to handle that. There should be, if you look at your bylaws, you should know how to do that. The things you should remember while you're on the board is you have no more power than anybody else when you're away from the board. You're just a regular citizen, but people will think you have power. So always be careful about, how you're portraying yourself. Somebody has a trouble with Mrs. Smith, the third grade teacher, and says to you, I'm very upset about this. Your job is not to say, okay, I'll talk to the superintendent about it. Your job is really to say to that person, well, we have a chain of command here. You have to follow the chain of command, because if you actually do more than just informing the superintendent, you may be recused. In other words, you may not be able to speak and vote if it ever comes up to the board, what do we do with Mrs. Jones? So those are just a couple of the things we should think about. And Joe, I'm going to give these out now, and let's go through it. And if you'd like to start off, since I already did my share of the talking. Sure. Yes.
I agree with everything Bob said.
That was easy.
Yeah.
That's the first time I've done that.
Before you start, could I make a comment? Something that resonated with me in all of these lines was, I heard at a presentation, the question was asked, and it was presented in this way. As members of a Board of Education, we should always ask ourselves, singly and collectively, what is the business of the Board of Education? Why are we here? What do we do? That resonated with me. I like to think structurally, and so it put things in context for me. So, thank you.
Yeah, and I think there has to be a shared vision of that. In fact, one of the most important things, I think, in terms of board superintendent relationships is that they, in your case, all 8 people share that vision, and that you also work together to put together a plan to make that vision real. I mean, we could spend 3 hours talking about the role of the superintendent and the board, so I'll try and be very brief. Basically, the job of the superintendent is to help the board be as successful as the board can be. Provide information, provide recommendations, make sure that the discussions are informed discussions in the sense that if there is information the board needs to make a decision, the superintendent has to make sure the board has that information. The superintendent also has a recommendation to present well-thought-out recommendations to the board and the reasons for it. Superintendent has a responsibility to not only work with the board as a whole, but to respond to the concerns and questions of individual board members. There should be some process for doing that, even if it's as simple, call me up kind of thing, but sometimes you need something a little more formal than that, just to make sure everybody has all the information that they should have. Superintendent has a responsibility to communicate information to all board members, not the 1 or 2. Usually that works out somehow or another in the relationship between the board and the board chair and the superintendent. What I've recommended to people is that even if information is given just to the board chair, that very shortly afterwards it gets to all the board members. Otherwise, the superintendent and the board chair are going to be accused of holding things back, and that just makes things dysfunctional. Once policies are set, once decisions are made, it is the responsibility of the superintendent to make sure they're carried out. as well as they can be carried out. One of the major recommendations the superintendent is going to make to the board is for the annual budget. Superintendent has a responsibility to come to the board and say, this is what we need to do the things you want to see happening in the school system. Always with a mind towards keeping in mind that you can't do everything in any given year. In fact, there are never any good years to get everything done. I was a superintendent for 23 years. Nobody ever told me, this is the year to recommend for everything. There was always a reason why there wasn't enough money to do something. So superintendents have to keep that in mind as well and set some priorities, help the board set some priorities. You can have a plan with 20 things in it. Some decision has to be made as to what are we going to do in 2016-17, what are we going to do in 2017-18, that kind of thing. And those decisions have to be reviewed on a regular basis, again, with the superintendent and the board working together on it. I'll just end with this and then we can get into some specifics. Where the superintendent-board relationship and the meeting of responsibilities works best is where the superintendent and the board, and I don't want this misinterpreted, really look at their relationship very similar to what a marriage is. Shared vision, mutual respect for one another, no surprises, and always within this, keeping in mind that in this marriage, how many kids do you have in the school system?
3,300.
There are 3,000 kids. And I think somebody said it in the course of the discussions, they have to be the thing that's most important in everybody's mind. That doesn't mean there can't be disagreements. There can, certainly superintendent's recommendations can be turned down, but if they're turned down for good reason, if they're turned down with respect for why they were brought forward, with some direction to the superintendent as to how to do things a little differently as we go forward, that's all healthy, that's good. In fact, I think a situation where it's always a unanimous vote there was a day in American public education before I ever became a superintendent, where superintendents got together on an annual basis and congratulated themselves on, we had another year of unanimous votes. Well, that was the 1940s and 1950s. I'm not sure it was even functional then. That's not the way things ought to operate now. But when there is disagreement, it has to be with mutual respect. It has to be with a good reason for the disagreement, and then working through the situation. Because usually when there's a disagreement, it's not a disagreement about the problem. It's a disagreement about a particular thing to do to resolve that problem. So if there's disagreement among board members and superintendents, you work it out. I think if there's that kind of relationship, no matter what happens, be it a small issue or a big issue, it can be worked out. If there isn't that kind of relationship, the smallest issue can cause difficulty. And let me end that with end at that point on the general stuff.
Yeah, I'll just add to what Joe said. First of all, talking about no surprises, I did think he was a superintendent in the 40s and 50s, so you saying that you weren't really surprised me.
But I always like to go on these things with Bob. It's always a lot of fun.
No, the truth of the matter is, no surprise is very important. What Joe said about relationships start with expectations of each other. You know what to expect. You know what your role is in the relationship, and you know what the other party's role is in the relationship. And you've got to talk about that. Every district, we will tell you that it's the board's job to adopt policy, and it's the superintendent's job to make sure the policy is carried out. And that's true. But in some districts, the line is not quite as black and white. There are gray areas because you're dealing with people, you're dealing with kids, you're dealing with demographics, all kinds of issues. So in other words, if I knew that somebody on the board was an expert on something that you can really make use of, then maybe in that situation you use that person more. And Murph is laughing a little bit. I think he's heard me say that before. You try to use people as best they can. If you find that you'd like to be more a part of something, don't hesitate to come forward and talk about that. So with that, you want to start?
Yeah, well, the document we just gave, you turn to page 6. The way we set this up is we have on the left-hand side in the table, we've got the Board of Ed responsibilities and the corresponding superintendent responsibilities. I really don't think we ought to read it to you. I think that it's clear in terms of what they are. But certainly, I mean, the first one that Bob mentioned earlier in terms of the board's responsibility was to, in essence, do the personnel function when it comes to the superintendent. but then you see the corresponding board superintendent responsibility, which is to work effectively with the board. Maybe the best thing for us to do, Bob, is to go down 3 or 4 of them on your side, and I'll go down 3 or 4 on mine. So
Okay.
why don't you go ahead?
So we already talked about policies, which was the second one. And then we talked a little about evaluation, we don't have to go into that, but it is the board's job to say, as I said before, to board members to say to members of the public who have a concern, not that we don't care about their concern or the board is too busy, but to go through the chain of command. And the chain of command will usually say, if you have a concern about a teacher, you go to the department head. You have a problem with the department head, maybe you go to assistant principal. I don't know. Every district is set up slightly differently, but eventually it should come to the board itself if it's not resolved before then. And the good issues are resolved before it comes all the way up. But part of your job is to represent, there are 2 things I always think of when I talk about a board, and that is, first of all, the board's job is to communicate the will of the community to the education of the children, of their children. In other words, it's your job to make sure that the community's voice is heard. That's your job. Now, I know you're state agents if you look very carefully at the law, but the way that people are elected in Connecticut on boards, and all of them are elected except a few on 2 boards, your job is to represent the will of the community to the education of the students. And the other part of that, sort of a corollary, is you should be representing all sectors of the community. In other words, we're not only talking about these kids, we're talking about all the kids of the community. Everyone has the right to know that there are Board of Education members working on their behalf, and obviously administrators and teachers and other members of the staff. But that really is, in sum, what the board is supposed to be doing.
Going down that first page, let me just supplement a couple of things on the superintendent's side. That third section has to do with the evaluation of the superintendent. I don't know what your practice is, but I think one of the decisions you have to make is whether the annual evaluation of the superintendent will be in writing or not. You have that option not to do it that way, but if it's put in writing, it is a public document. There's sometimes a problem with that, in that you may have a situation where you think the superintendent really is very, very good, but you have a couple areas you'd like the superintendent to work on. If that's put in writing in the wrong way, you know what the publicity is going to be. It's going to be all about those 2 areas, not about the 20 areas where people are happy. So you need to be very careful when you put things in writing. Sometimes the best feedback a superintendent gets is what's given verbally during the meeting when they discuss the evaluation, and not necessarily always put in writing in great detail. So I think that's something you need to keep in mind.
And we also suggest in the other document that every 6 months you either do the formal evaluation, which you're required to do under the law. That's what Joe was talking about. And by the way, be very careful about what you bring to the meetings, because if you've written stuff out, that is FOIable as well. So what we say is, think about the issues, look at the evaluation instrument that you're using, think about it in terms of, what you want to bring up before the full board and before the superintendent. And then at the end, anything in writing is very carefully done, usually by the board chair with help from the superintendent if necessary. Yes, Tracy?
Do you have a template for superintendent evaluation that you could share with us? Not tonight, obviously, but...
The other one of these documents, by the way, these documents are both on the CABE website.
And on CAPS.
And on
Okay.
CAPS.
We can send you copies.
That would be great. If you could send it to Ms. Osuba and/or Dr. Garcia, and they could share it with us, because for 2 years, since the testing systems have changed, we've really lacked a comprehensive evaluation. Like, when the previous superintendent was here, we had a numerical evaluation, and either it was a pass or a fail, it was clean cut. We've lacked that since the testing systems have changed and they've been in flux, and that kind of thing. I'd just like to see what other districts or a template are using. to be able to form ours for next year, because I don't think going another year without one is beneficial to our district.
We'll share that with you, but keep in mind it's a template that you've got to adopt to your context, so you're all comfortable with it.
Or not.
Or not adopt, yeah, I mean, yeah, you're going to have to do something with that. And that's number one. Number two, I think you're going to find it's not quite as heavily numerical as maybe your previous one was, because you're talking about evaluating professional services.
Right.
It gets pretty hard to reduce that to real small numbers. So
Right.
keep that in mind. In terms of the responsibilities that talk about referring things to the chain of command, superintendent's responsibility is to make sure there is a chain of command. I mean, that there's something, there's a procedure, and that it's pretty clear. That so, for example, if a parent has a problem with a teacher, they go to the teacher, then to the principal, then whoever at central office handles it, then the superintendent. That needs to be clear, because if it's not clear, and we refer people to a chain of command, they don't know, they'll feel you don't really want to deal with the issue. When you're dealing with personnel questions that you come up, you hear complaints about personnel, you refer them to the superintendent. Keep in mind that when the superintendent deals with that and comes back to you, superintendent has to be careful about what they tell you. Because if the superintendent tells you too much, and then action, and Bob said this before, action has to be taken against somebody, you could be in a situation where nobody on the board can participate. So, and that's difficult sometimes for the public to understand, it's difficult sometimes for board members to understand, is that the superintendent has to be very careful as to what they tell you and what they don't tell you. Your job, though, is to evaluate the superintendent in terms of the overall effectiveness of everybody on the staff. Is the staff an effective staff? Is the superintendent making sure there are programs and evaluation processes in place to make sure that the policies of the board are carried out, to make sure that the system operates efficiently and effectively? That's the level of evaluation that there should be, not on whether or not the superintendent gave you enough information about the third grade teacher who somebody complained to you about. Because they probably can't give you, unless you're going to bring somebody up for a termination, and then they're going to give, within that context, give you all the information. Before that, they got to be careful about what they tell you. In terms of making decisions based on data, I think it's reasonable for a board to make sure that the superintendent puts in place an effective and efficient data collection system. So data can be collected on student achievement and on anything else that needs to be, that's important.
And I just add to that, you know, you should have presentations about data. This is what's happening in the district. And if you don't understand it, because I think sometimes we get too deep into data and there's lots of jargon and there are things that are very hard to understand, ask questions. That's your job also, to ask questions and keep asking questions until you're satisfied with the answer and you really understand it. It's not helpful to just have a discussion where you see lots of data, but you don't know what it means. You don't know, you know, if you look at some of the data that's coming out in the last few weeks, the NAEP data, that's the nation's report card, or you look at some of the data that's come out of the State Department of Education, it's very hard to understand. So you've got to ask your professional staff, explain it to us, tell us what it means, where do we go from here? I mean, you're not getting data just so you know the data. It's so that you can make good decisions as you move forward.
The same spirit is true in the financial management of the school system. Superintendent has a responsibility to make sure that the funds are spent as appropriately as they should be, in line with the budget that the board put together. Actually, that budget is probably the most important policy decision a board makes every year, because it should give direction to the school system. And if you have questions about that, you need to ask them and get answers for them. It's very important for the public to feel that the school system is being operated effectively and efficiently from a fiscal point of view. This is their money. I remember as a superintendent sometimes having to remind staff of that they want you to do this, that, and the other thing is, wait a minute, you know, we need to get authorization from the people who represent the folks who pay for this stuff. It's very easy, and I was on the other side of that too before I became a superintendent, wonder why we can't do some things. We need to keep that fiscal responsibility in mind. I think superintendents do that. But if you've got questions, you think something is not transparent, something isn't clear, something may be, you know, not going the way you think it ought to, you can't be shy about that. I don't think you are, from what I saw at the discussion earlier, but I thought I'd mention that. And then finally, in the area of, well, two others. In the delegation of responsibilities to the superintendent, I think the other side of that coin is the superintendent has to feel comfortable coming to you when the superintendent feels that she's being micromanaged. And to say to you, I think you're getting over the line here. And you've got to, now, you may not agree with her, but at least she has to feel comfortable being able to come to you without repercussions. And I'm not saying that because I think you do that. I'm just saying that because I've seen in districts where people do mention that, and that is a red flag in front of a board, and it causes all sorts of difficulty. That doesn't mean, again, that you have to agree with the superintendent, but the superintendent has to be able to say, wait a minute, I think you're really getting into my area here, and you ought to let me make the decisions you hired me to make. And then finally, when it comes to the board self-evaluation, the superintendent's role in that is to give honest and respectful feedback to the board as a whole, not to individual board members. They can do that off to the side if they want to, but then they really shouldn't do that either. But I think that's the role of and I think you ought to seek, at somewhere in your self-evaluation, the superintendent's opinion. Again, you have to agree with it, but at least the superintendent will have a chance to share with you, as your chief executive officer, how they think you're functioning, and maybe some suggestions for you to do your job better. That's that page.
Yeah, I'd only add, think of yourself as a team with the superintendent. That means you don't undermine each other, you don't surprise each other. When the vote is over, you don't go to the press and say, oh, they voted wrong, because someday you're going to be on the other side of that. And it's a morale killer for the board, and it undermines the confidence you'll have in everybody else on the board. The other thing that is a very important thing that we spend a lot of time talking about is PD, professional development. Make sure you come to professional development, you read things so that you're knowledgeable. Remember a few minutes ago I said keep asking questions, keep learning. You know, lifetime learners applies to board members too. And you know, we do a lot of workshops. Certainly, if any of you have been to the CABE convention, there are lots of different workshops. There's always more learning. I've been in this business now between Connecticut and New York 36 years, and I'm learning every day. There's always more to learn, so you ask the right questions, and you can follow up with questions that make sense, particularly in this district.
Yeah, on page 7, a lot of that, again, I think is self-explanatory. There's a couple of areas of responsibilities. The second and third one down have to do with evaluation systems. I think we've talked about that already, but again, the superintendent's responsibility is to make sure there is an effective system for evaluating the performance of all employees, not just teachers and administrators, but all employees. And if you feel that is not, you don't understand it, you should ask questions about it. If you feel that something needs to be done to improve the system, you cannot be shy about bringing that forward and have that discussion with the superintendent.
But the only person whose evaluation you're allowed to see is that of the superintendent. In other words, you can't say, well, let's see Mrs. Jones' evaluation. No, you're not entitled to that under the law. But certainly you're allowed to see the forms that are used, and you can ask questions when the superintendent brings it forward. Tell us about what's happening, how many evaluations did you do? Do they seem to be working? Are people getting the message? You know, we have spent more time in meetings on evaluations, teacher evaluations, principal evaluations. We have another meeting tomorrow on it. They're very tough meetings, and these are not easy times if you're involved with teacher evaluation or principal evaluation. But the whole idea is to make the system better. Make sure that teachers who my wife she teaches in Manchester, she told me she wasn't evaluated for 8 years. That's really not a help to her. She has been evaluated since the new system came in, but she's also been told you should look a little more at this or that. The idea is to help, not to punish.
And it is not a bad idea from time to time, in a public forum, either at a committee meeting, probably at a committee meeting, but certainly at a board meeting, for a report from the administration on the evaluation system.
Right.
If no other reason than to assure the public that it's being done.
We had one last month.
Because if you don't get into that kind of a discussion, I'm sure you've heard people come up to you and say, well, people, you know, are not being evaluated, are not being held accountable. There should be some forum where you get that information out, that this is how it's happening in the school system, and a good discussion about it. Two final things I want to say in relation to all of this stuff. The first has to, I'm sure this never happens in this community. That somebody tries to put some political pressure on you to do this, that, or the other. I know that never happens here. But in case it happens in the future, I think you need to be honest with each other and with the superintendent about it. Now, you got to be careful how you talk about that, depending on where it comes from. But you don't want to have the superintendent sitting there saying, now, somebody is saying something they haven't said before, and I'm wondering really where it's coming from, or they're hearing rumors about this, that, or the other thing, that somebody is trying to put pressure on somebody to do this. Usually that's around appointments of whoever, usually administrators. Sometimes it's down to appointments of custodians.
Gracious.
I think if, again, I have not heard anything about that happening here. The way you're smiling, I suspect it may have happened one or two times in the past, but whatever. I think if that's happening, there needs to be an honest discussion. Sometimes that can be done depending on the topic in executive session. Sometimes it has to be done in different forms, but don't keep these things away from each other. It's the same by the superintendent. Superintendent can hear those things and say, you know, we have a situation here we need to deal with because we've got some people putting pressure on us to do something. If they're putting pressure on you to do the thing you want to do anyhow, that's wonderful, because you can look like a hero politically and also do the right thing. But if they're trying to put pressure on you to do something you really don't think you ought to, then you need to have that discussion. Centered around all of that, and this is where I started, I think, when we first started talking, I think the most important thing for any school system is for there to be a shared vision for what the school system should be now and what it needs to be 5 years from now on the part of everyone. And that is something that is a work in progress, should be evaluated on an annual basis, because there are all sorts of decisions you can make, all sorts of things you can do. And very few of them are bad all by themselves. The question is, do they fit the vision that we have for this school system? Is this where we want to go with the district? If it's yes, then those proposals are ones to go forward. If not, they can be very good things to do, but we don't want to go in that direction, so we put it aside. If you can keep that in mind, especially when things get difficult, like having to cut a budget. I know you never have to do that either. You got to make some priority decisions. You're going to ask for a certain amount of money from the community. They're going to tell you what you can spend. Frequently, it's not everything you ask for. Now, what do you cut? And that has to be dependent on your shared vision of where you want the school system to go. So the things that get protected are the ones that are most consistent with that vision, and the ones that are not protected are the ones that are least consistent with that vision. Very important to keep that before you and to go back to. I'd almost repeat it at almost every board meeting. This is what we are all about. This is what we want to see this school system become. And now let's have our discussions, whether it's about anything that's coming up, in terms of what's the most consistent thing with that vision.
That's really good, because some boards actually do that. They read the mission statement at the beginning, remind everybody you're here for the kids, that's your job. You're not here for the town council or the city council. You're here for the work that you're doing to help the kids. And I think a lot of what Joe's saying is shared responsibility between the board and the superintendent. We put that on page 5 because there are a number of things that you have to do together to get the budget passed, to work on policy, to help the kids, to develop the mission and the vision. The other thing I wanted to make sure we talked about, and then let's just open it up to questions, is the relationship between the board chair and the superintendent. Board chair's job is to sort of keep everybody in line. Not to be condescending, but sort of like make sure everybody at the meetings has a chance to fully air their concerns if you're discussing an issue, that everybody feels they have the equal opportunity to, if necessary, get something on the agenda, that everybody's getting the same respect from everybody else on the team. That's really the board chair's job. The board chair's job is to learn why people are on the board and sort of how to get everybody moving in the same direction. There's a good book about that called Leading Leaders, and while it's not all about school boards, it's about how corporate boards, how that one person who is the chair of the board has the job of sitting down with each board member whether over coffee or something social, understanding where they're coming from, as we would say in the 60s, and, you know...
I don't remember that.
You don't remember that? Well, you know why you don't remember the 60s.
I remember yesterday.
But the point is that you learn about why they're on the board. Maybe they have kids in the system. They care about, say, the athletic program. They want a gifted and talented program again. You know, everybody has their own reasons. It's really the board chair's job to sort of pull them all together. And that doesn't mean there'll be money for everything next year, but there might be a way to figure out, well, we can't really do what you want, but let's at least have a presentation or a workshop. Boards can have their own workshops, just like this one, on something that's meaningful to everybody on the board. That's one way of everybody feeling they're a member of the team and they're playing for something that's really important to them.
We'd be happy to take your questions.
What's the mission here? Anybody know it? Don't go looking it up. I know you can look it up on the... You might want to revisit it. When was the last time you looked
The
at it?
mission of Windham Public Schools is to provide all students with an equitable education that is founded in culture, diversity, understanding, and they're prepared for college and career. And then our vision is every day, every student in every classroom will be engaged in their own learning.
Very good.
Excellent.
Very good. When was the last time you really looked at that to make sure it's still what you want?
Last year?
Last year?
The retreat
Okay.
in September.
Yep.
Okay. When was the last time you all looked at your code of ethics?
We don't have a code of ethics.
Well, that answers that.
We have an ethics policy,
have
but
an
it's
ethics
We
pretty...
have an ethics policy, but it's not a code.
The problem that we've had with ethical behavior, Tracy and I have been on the board 7 years,
Yep.
more than 7 years, is that if someone does something egregious, they're an elected official, there really isn't much you can do about it.
Absolutely.
And you can have a policy that says that you're not supposed to do that, but there's no effective way of dealing with people who do that anyway.
You're absolutely right. Let me make a suggestion. Many of the boards, including the K Board of Directors, I don't know if you guys do it at CAPS, but we take out our code of ethics at our back-to-school meeting. We show it to everybody, make sure they've seen it, ask every board member to sign it. Put it up. We don't put it up, but many districts do. Put it on the wall. Yes, you know, it's sort of like CABE. We don't have any regulatory authority. We can't say, you guys did bad because, I don't know, you spend all your time on a field trip policy. You know, that's not our role. But what we can say is, here's the best practice, here's what you ought to be aiming for. One of the other things we do in that, if you've been to the CAPS convention, is every year we give out awards that suggest to boards that these are the best practices, and you probably do 90% of them, they're not real hard, and we say to boards, wow, you've won an award. I can't do more than that. We don't have the authority, and we're not asking. We're here to help you, not to regulate or police you. But by using your moral powers of persuasion and listening to others who are saying these are the best practices and this is what we do in our district, you can get an award like that. So even, Murph, if you can't, and we know what the law is, you can't really punish a person no matter pretty much whatever they do. Still, once a year, you say, these are the expectations as far as ethics.
Yeah, I would not sell short moral persuasion. I've seen it over many, many years work in a number of instances. If, for example, there's a clear code of ethics and a board member violates the code and gets called on it by the other board members, not in an argumentative fashion, you know, you're no good kind of thing, but did you know that you weren't supposed to do this? And a discussion of that takes place. Frequently, the perpetrator, doesn't right away say, "Oh yes, I was wrong." You try and get out of that person why they did it. Why did you feel you had to violate the code of ethics on this thing? That doesn't happen. It doesn't work every time, but I've seen it work in a substantial majority of cases. Now, you could have a situation, and Bob talked about the Bridgeport situation, where you could have You could have somebody there, to try and even enforce the code of ethics, it's not going to make any difference. But I wouldn't sell short the,
And I only talk about it because it's in the newspaper. I'm not telling you anything I shouldn't be.
Well, we're aware that there are some other boards in the state that are sometimes chaotic.
This is beyond
This
chaotic.
board-
They
this
stopped
board has
having meetings.
This board has been fortunate in that whether the board as a whole has operated effectively or ineffectively, the board has usually not been on each other's case.
That's
You know,
good.
We generally figure out a way to get along with one another.
That's good.
Keep in mind, the next election may be different people here. So having a code of ethics, if you don't have one, I think you guys should put one together. Certainly Cape can help you with that. And at least you have something to go back to if you need to.
There's
And
a
you can
policy,
give-
there's a policy statement. It's
Is
kind
there?
of spare,
Oh.
but it's there.
I do agree with Murphy. It's getting better because at the beginning was a lot of dislike because of political reason or personal issue between board members. And it shouldn't be like that because we should be putting the kid number one rather than personal issues or whatever.
Yeah.
Oh, that's great.
But we are getting a lot better about that.
Good.
Good.
Even when we weren't getting along, issues were voted on. I think we did collectively a measured, logical process was used. We barked at each other a little bit, I think, but at the end of the day, the process didn't suffer, I don't think. I think that tenet of we're here as advocates for the children's education drove all of us in that direction. So kudos to all of us.
Yeah. Well, Baba and I are not here because somebody told us you're not functioning well. We're here to give this presentation, which we give. You take out of it what you think makes sense. You may hear some things here that we said, and you're saying, we're doing that. This is good. We have affirmation for continuing to do it. Hopefully, we gave you one or two things to think about to do things a little better. That's really why we're here. So we're not here because anybody reached a conclusion. You're not interested in kids or anything like that. So if we gave you that impression, we really didn't mean to.
And if you want to take the time again to fill out those surveys, I thank those who did it, and get it to us, we'll return it. I can come out again, I live in Glastonbury, I'm not that far away, and go over it with you. We want to see all our boards succeed, and when they reach out for a little information or help from us, we're glad to be able to do that.
This district does have one unusual feature. Technically, the district is still under state supervision. That means the special master law. But there's no special master because we cut a deal. We cut a deal to combine the roles of special master and superintendent. But that means that our superintendent has some of the authorities that exist in the special master statute that a typical superintendent wouldn't necessarily have, one of which is training the board. And I suppose that has something to do with why you all are here tonight.
Yeah.
Yes. But that's okay. Yes. And you know what we say to boards that don't have special masters? You should let your superintendent be the educational leader, not only of the district, but of the board too. Because they usually are tied in through CAPS in particular to what's happening across the state, what's going to happen. Who knows what's going to happen out of Washington, but it's usually the superintendent who is the professional who can help you understand the data and what all these different things mean. So let her do that job.
That's a crucial role.
Absolutely.
Yep.
I think I agree. I mean, there's nothing wrong with continuing to learn the functions of the board and how to do certain things, because I myself learn every day.
Sure.
And there's nothing wrong with every year freshening up and doing reminders. I think we should take every opportunity to do workshops for board members. I think it's a positive thing, and it'll only help us in the long run.
Yeah, that would be true at any time. I think we're in a time of particular ferment and change in society and in education also, so it's even more important to do that. we tried to model that in our two organizations by taking this document that had been there for a few years, saying we need to update this thing. And I think our intention is not to let it go 7 or 8 years again. It's to every 2 or 3 years look at it and say, okay, where do we need to make some adjustments? I mean, just the communication patterns that are now available to people are a lot different than they were 10 years ago. Social media, you know, Twitter has become the way to make public policy almost. And so it's all there, and it's things that people have to take into account. The conversations that used to take place around the deli counter in the supermarket are not taking place, and everybody in the community knows what everybody is thinking through social media. I'm not saying that's bad, I'm just saying, that means we need to at least look at that and say, does that mean we should operate a little differently? And so it's good to have those discussions.
Boards of Education are political accidents. If they bring together a group of people that are representative of the community, that's a wonderful thing. This board is lucky. We have a huge cross-section of the community here. I mean, we have a bunch of educators, we have people from organized labor. I mean, we just have a great cross-section. You know, we have folks that have been involved in the community, in the district, in a whole bunch of different roles from the time their children were, you know, children. So I think our accident is fermenting and working really well. I think we are, you know, getting our feet under us. It took us a little time, but I think ultimately the district is getting better. We're seeing those numbers. We're seeing positive things happen. What family doesn't have issues?
Well, quite frankly, if you don't have some problems to deal with, then you're living with your heads in the sand. Because there are all sorts of things out there that need to be resolved. And sometimes, and the easy ones get resolved before they ever even come to the superintendent. You know, and any well-functioning school system, I'm sure this is one, the easy things, Pat doesn't have to worry about. The stuff that gets on her desk is never easy to deal with, and then when it gets to you, it's even more difficult. But that's okay, that's what the function is, and you work it through. And if you make a mistake every now and then, you make a mistake, you admit it, and you go forward after that, so. And I'm glad to hear that you feel you're really representing the different aspects of the community. I think the fact that you no longer have a separate special master is an indication somebody else agrees with you that you're making progress. And now you've got the combination special master superintendent, which we should put that slash in.
And to her credit, she's never exercised that
Special master.
authority. That I know of, anyway.
No, I never exercise it. No, I haven't used it.
She's been subtle.
No, I have never used it.
I think she's done it very well.
Sometimes you don't need to swing the hammer if you have to.
That's right.
In fact, well, you know Teddy Roosevelt's thing, yeah.
They do.
Speak softly and carry her.
Bob will claim I knew him, but that's not true.
You knew his dad.
Sorry, I can't resist.
Did he tell you to say that? Oh, I think I gotta go home. I hope we helped you out.
Yes, thank
Yes, you have.
Is there anything else we can do for you?
Any
Sure, we'll call you back again.
Well, you
Okay.
should. We
Yes.
like that.
Gigi,
Thank you very much for your
Thank you,
time.
Joe. Thank you, Bob, appreciate it.
Keep up your good work, all of you.
Thank you. I need a motion to adjourn.
Always in
All
order.
those in,
Well,
Tracy, do you want yours back?
all those in order?
Shred it. Thank you.
I think the executive session is not happening.
No, it's not. It's not happening.
After the email we got?
That's why I made the motion.
Yeah,
After
sure.
the email we got today?
If I'm not there.